Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about some horror films that I've watched recently. I shared a video talking about the 13 horror films that I was going to be watching in the month of October, so I thought I would come back and do a bit of a recap on those and let you know what I thought. There were two other films that I also watched recently that weren't on that list, so I have 15 films to get through, and I thought I would start off with the ones I liked a little bit less than the others and work my way up to my favourites. So first up are a couple of films I only gave 2 stars to. These are all out of 5 stars, and one is Simon, King of the Witches from 1971. This is about a guy called Simon. He is a witch, or a magician as he calls it, and he is homeless, and he ends up kind of falling in with this like bougie crowd, and he'll go to their parties and they'll pay him for various like magical talismans. This is one that's been on my list for quite a while, so I was glad to finally get around to it. Maybe it just wasn't quite what I was expecting, but I didn't enjoy it too much. It was a bit slow, there wasn't really too much to the plot, and the acting was okay. It had its moments. I enjoyed the scenes of witchcraft rituals, they were very cool, but other than that, it was just a bit silly, but not in a very fun way, if that makes sense. It's definitely very 70s, so if you love things of that era, then you may get a kick out of this. But yeah, I just couldn't really rate it very highly, so I just gave it 2 stars out of 5. And next up, another film about witches is Suspiria, that came out this year, 2018. And I know a lot of people have been raving about this, saying that it's amazing, it's a masterpiece. Unfortunately, I just did not feel the same way. So, I am a big fan of the original Suspiria, and admittedly, when I first heard they were remaking it, I just wasn't interested. But when I saw the trailer, I thought it looked awesome, so I was definitely on board with, you know, just going in with an open mind and viewing this as a totally separate film and not comparing the two. It looked good, the acting was good, but I never really got invested in any of the characters, and it just never really grabbed me at any point, and I just didn't find it very compelling. I found the exposition really clunky. They tend to over-explain a lot, yet there are also a bunch of like side stories and backstories that end up just kind of confusing things, and at the end I understood what was going on, I just didn't think it was very good. There's one scene that I really enjoyed. It's probably the first real scene of horror that we get, and it is pretty horrific. I thought it was really well done, really effective. And even later on in the film, when we could have had some more scenes like that, they just kind of paled in comparison for me. So by the end of the film, I was honestly just underwhelmed. So that may be an unpopular opinion, I've heard so many people raving about this, but so it goes. Okay, moving on to some 3-star films. So these were ones that were good, but I just wasn't blown away by them. First up is Der Nachtmahr, or The Nightmare, which came out in 2015, and this is kind of a hard one to describe, but it's about a teenage girl who, she goes out partying a lot with her friends, and something strange happens one night, and after that she starts to see this creature, and her parents and her friends don't believe her, so they think there's something psychological wrong with her. And this was an interesting film. I thought the ideas in it were great, I thought the acting was great, the setting of this kind of teenage girl and her peers was all really well done. The soundtrack is by Alec Empire of Atari Teenage Riot fame, if you're a fan of him or them, but overall it was a bit lacking somehow, so I gave it 3 stars. Next up is Creepshow from 1982. This is a horror anthology written by Stephen King and directed by George A. Romero, and I guess I just expected more from this film after hearing so many people talk so highly of it. Maybe it's one that if I had watched it when I was a bit younger, I would have had more of an attachment to it, but watching it now, it was okay and it definitely had its moments, but it wasn't as good as I had hoped. Next up is Mandy from this year, 2018. This is a revenge story starring Nicolas Cage. And I had seen the director Panos Cosmatos' previous film Beyond the Black Rainbow, which came out a few years ago, and I loved that one. I thought that was excellent. So when I heard about his new one, I was all aboard. But I don't know, it just didn't quite work for me. I think it's one that I appreciated more than I personally enjoyed. It's definitely pretty wacky, it's got some crazy visuals and lots of crazy Nicolas Cage. So if any of that sounds like your cup of tea, then I definitely do recommend checking it out. I'm still really glad I watched it. When I finished watching it, my first thought was it's like if The Hills Have Eyes was directed by David Lynch, plus a lot of drugs, plus Nicolas Cage. So yeah, it was still worth a watch and I gave that one 3 stars. Next is Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954. This is one of the classic Universal monster movies, and it's one that I think I saw as a kid, but I really didn't have too much of a memory of it. And this was good, but again, not as good as I kind of thought it would be. I think my impression of the creature from popular culture is that he is a much more sympathetic character than he actually is in the film. And the story in the film is much more simple than I thought it was going to be. I thought we would get more into the mind of the creature and maybe have like a scene that showed his tender side or something, but it was really kind of cut and dried. I still sympathised with the creature because these people are invading his environment, but I just thought there was more to the story than there actually was. So yeah, it kind of surprised me actually. Some things I did really like about this film was the creature. I thought the costume and makeup were all amazing, and also the underwater scenes were all fantastic as well, especially for the time, you know, in the 50s. I thought they were really excellently done and really beautiful. So yeah, this is another one that I appreciated much more than I enjoyed, and I gave it 3 stars. Now I have a few films that I rated 3.5 stars, so they're somewhere between good and excellent. Better than good, but not quite excellent, I guess. And first up we have The Creeping Flesh from 1973. This is about a scientist who has this skeleton that he brings back. I think it was from like Papua New Guinea or somewhere, and the premise that I had read of the film before watching it made it sound like the skeleton came back to life and basically killed the scientist and everyone else in its path. But the film is actually very different to that. There's actually much more to the story than that. It's about this scientist and his daughter and his wife, who has been in like a mental hospital for some time. So it delves into that whole backstory, and it was, yeah, really quite sad in places, and definitely a different vibe to the whole film than what I was anticipating. I did enjoy this one, and it stars the brilliant Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, so that's always awesome. And yeah, I gave this one 3.5. Next is What We Do in the Shadows from 2014, and this is a mockumentary about a group of vampires who live together. I wasn't rolling around on the floor laughing, I'll admit, but it was funny, and it's also a good mix of somehow being really charming and endearing, but also kind of gory and grisly as well. So it was a good mix of the two, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5. Next is Night of the Demons from 1988. This is a horror comedy about a group of teenagers who spend Halloween night in a funeral home, and of course things go horribly wrong. And this was a lot of fun and just all of the 80s schlocky goodness you could want. Some really good practical effects and an amazing dance scene to a Bauhaus song. Like, what more could you want? Okay, now moving on to the 4-star films. we have November from 2017, and this is a black and white art house film from Estonia, and I'm not sure I would class it as horror, but it's definitely atmospheric and it has this kind of like folklore aspect to the story, so if you're a horror fan you might dig it. And this is an example of a long and slow film that manages to be compelling. It is shot in black and white and it's absolutely beautiful, super atmospheric, the music is amazing, and it's kind of like a love story about this girl in the village who is in love with a boy in the village, but he has eyes for someone else. It was a really enjoyable film. I gave it 4 stars. Next is The City of the Dead from 1960. This is about a student who is studying witchcraft, taught by none other than Christopher Lee, of course, and she travels to this town that was known for burning witches centuries ago, and she's going there to do some research to write her paper. And she finds out that witchcraft is still very much alive in this town. This was a great little gem. If you like films like The Wicker Man, then I would recommend checking this one out. It has some similar themes, but is kind of also very different at the same time, but also stars Christopher Lee, so there's that. It's black and white and beautiful, and it opens with this brilliant scene of this town many centuries ago where they're about to burn this witch. And yeah, it's kind of cheesy, but I just really enjoyed it a lot. It was good fun, and I ended up watching this one on Halloween night itself, and yeah, it was a good time. I gave it 4 stars. Next is Halloween from this year, 2018. This is a sequel to the original Halloween film from 1978. It disregards all of the previous sequels that have been made, and it picks up 40 years after the original. Halloween is one of my favourite horror films, so I was really excited for this one, but kind of kept my expectations low because I didn't want to be disappointed. But I really enjoyed it. It was really good fun. I loved seeing all of the Easter eggs, the little nods to previous films. I think they did that really well in that if you spot them, then great. If you don't spot them, it didn't feel like something had been shoehorned in there. There were a few things I didn't love about it, and one part of the storyline in particular that I just thought was very silly. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you've seen it you probably know which bit I mean. But I still got on board with it after that and just thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very entertaining, which was really all I wanted from it. Next is Night of the Demon from 1957. This is about a professor who is investigating a devil-worshipping cult and its leader. And this was just so good. It had some fantastic moments. At the beginning it has this like crazy scene which I was not expecting, and then the climax at the end was also just so brilliantly done, and everything in between was just a really good mystery, so kind of more of a mystery with horror elements, I would say. But yeah, the horror elements in it were, especially for the time, I think really well done, and yeah, such a great film, definitely recommend it. Okay, 2 more films to talk about. Next up is one I gave 4.5 stars to, and it is Hounds of Love from 2016. This is about a sadistic couple who kidnap a teenage girl and keep her captive as their plaything. And I knew this was going to be a pretty brutal watch, and it is. Definitely deals with a lot of horrific things going on, but honestly it's not very graphic. A lot of it is kind of what you don't see. It is an incredibly tense film. I was just tense throughout the whole thing. It is also quite emotional, it's heartbreaking, I sobbed my eyes out. It was just so excellently done. I think the actors, the 3 main ones, the girl and the couple, were all fantastic, especially the woman who played the wife. I thought she was phenomenal. So yeah, difficult subject matter, but an excellent film. I gave this one 4.5 stars. And last up, my favourite film of the past month or so was The Craft from 1996. And if you're still here and haven't already questioned my taste, then you may be questioning it at this point, and that's totally fine. I totally admit that my rating of The Craft is partly based on nostalgia. It was a film I saw tons of times when I was a teenager and absolutely loved. And yeah, it's a very subjective rating. This is about a teenage girl who moves to a new town and she becomes part of a coven with 3 other girls. I hadn't actually seen it in some years and I wasn't sure if it was going to live up to my memory of it, so I was really pleasantly surprised. I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I watched it with my husband, who had never seen it before, and he actually really enjoyed it too. He said it was way better than he thought it was going to be, so that was really cool. And it's definitely not a perfect film by any means. I can definitely pick faults with it, but it's just so enjoyable and so nostalgic for me that I had to rate it 5 stars. So those were all of the films I watched in October, and then Suspiria was actually at the beginning of November, but whatever, I decided to include it anyway. And this is actually my first film wrap up, but it got me thinking maybe I could do this as a monthly thing and just talk about the film and TV that I've been watching each month. Let me know if that is something you might be interested in. Let me know if you've seen any of these and let me know what you thought, whether you agreed or disagreed with my opinions. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!